In this video, I'll discuss everything you need to know to understand bonds, and we're starting right now. Hey guys, welcome to another video from the Keystone Financial Academy. My name is Elliot, and if you're new to this channel, I invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Okay, let's talk about bonds. So in my discussions with regular investors, I consistently notice that folks may have a rough idea what bonds are, but few actually have bonds in a portfolio that they themselves put together. Usually individual investors are all about stocks and mutual funds, and maybe they have some bonds as part of a retirement account. But by and large, this topic is a bit mysterious to a lot of people and they don't get too deep into it. This video is exactly for those folks. The various types of bonds are all important components of investing. And we're going to go over everything you need to know to really understand this topic, and who knows, maybe you'll become an active bond investor. So first of all, let's get a few definitions out of the way, starting with what exactly is a bond. Bonds are debt obligation securities and stand in contrast to stocks that are equity securities. A bond is simply an IOU from the issuer or the borrower to the bondholder or the creditor that says the issuer will pay back the full value of the bond plus interest. Fundamentally, this is no different from you taking out a loan from a bank and having to pay back the loan plus any interest. So bonds are, first and foremost, instruments to borrow money. Bonds are also referred to as fixed income securities because the interest income they generate for the bondholder is usually fixed and predictable. Bonds are purchased and held by both private and institutional investors for the same reasons that banks make loans. That is, to make money off of the interest rate. And bonds are considered an essential part of a diversified and balanced portfolio. In today's low interest environment, they're looked at as not terribly lucrative but very safe investments as compared to stocks. So who issues bonds? They can be issued by the federal or local governments to fund either regular operations or more likely infrastructure projects, and by corporations to raise money for expansions or acquisitions. So again, bonds are basically a funding source for large entities. Regular people go to a bank or maybe to a relative to borrow money, while governments and corporations issue bonds. There are a few more definitions you have to know to speak the language of bonds. The first set of terms are principal, face value, and par value. These terms are equivalent and they refer to the amount or the value that is stated on the bond, and usually what you initially purchase it for. In other words, this is the amount of money that the bond holder loaned to the bond issuer. Bond principal amounts can vary widely. The smallest amount one can invest is $25 for a U.S. savings bond, and goes up from there to $100 to $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, or even more, depending on the type of bond. The next term is maturity. This refers to the date when the purchased bond will be repaid in full. It could be thought of as the length of the bond in the same way you can think of the length of a road trip. Maturities can vary widely from just a few weeks to 30 years or even more. The next terms are coupon rate and interest rate, and these terms are equivalent. This is how bond issuers pay for the privilege of borrowing money, and how bond holders make their money. The interest or coupon is represented as a percentage of face value. So if the value of the bond is $1,000 and you promise the 5% interest, then the amount you receive will be $50 annually for each such bond that you hold. Bonds usually generate payments every 6 months, but every month, quarter, or annual payments are also possible. Interest rates are usually fixed, but can be adjustable in some cases as well. The next term is yield, and this is the true payout of the bond. This is one of the more confusing aspects of bonds and has to do with price fluctuations. In essence, yield and interest rate are equivalent if the price is exactly the face value. So for a $1,000 bond paying a 5% interest, the yield is also 5%. However, if the price of the bond drops to $800 or rises to $1,200, the interest rate, which is fixed at 5%, gives a different yield at these two price points. Now there are two types of yield calculations, a simple yield and the more accurate yield to maturity or YTM, but this calculation can get somewhat complex and we're not going to go over it in this introductory bonds video. The next term is issuer, and this refers to who issues the bond. As mentioned earlier, there are generally two issuers of bonds, governments and corporations, and I'll discuss both in more detail in a little bit. And for the final definition, we have ratings. This grading of bonds refers mostly to corporate bonds, bonds and some municipal bonds, as corporations can't tax anyone to back up their bond issuing and must rely on good credit ratings to assure investors that the bonds will be paid back. And I'll discuss corporate bonds in a bit more detail shortly. Okay, so now you should have an idea of all these definitions of bonds, so let's now discuss government bonds in more detail and corporate bonds in more detail. First up are federal government bonds. There are several types, and they're all collectively called treasuries. So here's what we have. We have treasury bills, or T-bills, and their maturity is less than 1 year. Then we have treasury notes, also known as T-notes, and their maturity is about 2 years to up to 10 years. And finally, we have treasury bonds, and their maturity is greater than 10 years and can go all the way up to 30 or longer. There are a number of other treasury securities such as savings bonds, TIPS, and FRNs, but we won't really get a chance to discuss them in this introductory video. So how do you invest in and purchase T-bills, T-notes, and bonds? The best way is directly from the federal government at the website treasurydirect.gov, which I'll leave right up here. Here's a screenshot of the website, and as you can see, there are a number of options on the column on the left for individual investors to use. If you click on the Securities We Sell link, you will see options to purchase some of the treasuries I just mentioned. So the other government bonds I wanted to mention are sold at a city or a municipal level and are called municipals or munis for short. Munis are attractive to many investors due to most of them being tax exempt, and they fall into two broad categories. First is revenue bonds, which fund revenue generating projects such as toll bridges, and general obligation bonds, which fund non-revenue generating projects that are there for the public good. As an investor, you can buy either one. How do you invest in and purchase munis? Well, unlike treasuries, you can get these from bond dealers, brokerages, banks, or sometimes even from the municipality itself. Okay, so that is the basics on government bonds. Let's now talk about corporate bonds. I've already mentioned why corporations issue bonds is to raise money. They can also do this with sales of stock, of course, but the advantage of bonds is that the company doesn't have to give away equity or a piece of itself when it issues bonds. A company can also go to a bank to get money, just like individuals, but that of course is more expensive for the corporation. Again, bonds are a better way to raise money. There are two basic types of corporate bonds. The first is a short-term kind called commercial paper, and the other is the longer term called just regular corporate bonds, and that's the one we're going to talk about. Now, the first thing you need to know about corporate bonds is that they are rated for quality, or the ability of the company to pay back the bonds. And this is similar to individuals being rated with a credit score, which kind of points to their ability to pay back their debt. Some well-known bond rating agencies include S&P, Moody's, Fitch, and they rate corporate bonds from a top grade of AAA down to AA, then to A, and then to B, C, all the way down to D, which is junk status. The ratings, as I just mentioned, of course have to do with the ability of the company to not default on its bond obligations, and you generally want to stick to investment grade AAA or AA bonds when you invest in them. They are the safest and are issued by the strongest companies. Investing in corporate bonds is also very easy. You can buy them from bond dealers, banks, or brokers. Okay, so those are the basics on the two types of bonds you can generally invest in, government and corporate. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that for investing purposes, you don't necessarily need to buy individual bonds. Instead, you can invest in bond mutual funds or ETFs. ETFs are, of course, exchange-traded funds, and there's a link in the description below if you want to watch a video on what they are. There are quite a few bond ETFs out there, and they tend to specialize in government only or corporate only and maybe some other niche, and they are a great way to get into bond investing without having to sit there and pick out individual bonds. Some very well-known and very large bond ETFs include Vanguard's Total Bond Market ETF, ticker symbol BND, iShares Core US Aggregate Bond ETF, ticker symbol AGG, and you can also invest in overseas bonds with something like Vanguard's Total International Bond Funds, ticker symbol BNDX. There is a lot more to bonds, and the topic can get pretty complex. I didn't talk about bond yields and pricing in any real detail, or what bond duration, convexity, and yield curves are. I'll save those for an advanced bond video to come at a later date. Hopefully this video is enough to serve as a basic introduction to bonds for those folks that just haven't had much exposure to them. Alright, as always, be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments below what topics you would like to see me cover. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all soon.